This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 159, Why Your Team Needs a Quality Czar. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is January 28th, 2016. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. To learn more about content marketing, I invite you to download our free audio. It's called 5 Things You Must Know About Content Marketing. And you can get your very own copy at contentmarketingaudio.com. Last week, I shared a tale of 2 speakers, a Catholic nun and a marketing guru, only one of whom knew something about good storytelling. If you happen to miss that episode, please feel free to check it out on iTunes or on Stitcher or via the RSS feed. This week, we're talking once again about quality and why your team needs a quality czar. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Some news out of Facebook to kick off this week's news feed. Facebook is rolling out, and I'm going to quote here from their blog post. It is an organic targeting tool to help publishers reach and engage their audiences on Facebook and better understand the interests of people clicking on their posts. It's called Audience Optimization, and it consists of 3 features. Number 1, preferred audience. So when you publish a post, you can actually specify the audience you want to see it in terms of their interest. So you could say, I want this post to appear to people who have an interest in, for my own example, content marketing, inbound marketing, etc. And that's handy if your brand serves different audiences. For example, if you serve both nonprofit and for-profit organizations and you create a post that is specific to one of those audiences, you can now specify which audience you want to see that post. Very, very handy. The second component is audience restrictions. So you can specify people you do not want to see this post in their news feed. So if a specific post is relevant to all but one of your niche audiences, you can exclude that audience so that you're not popping up in their news feeds with irrelevant content. And the third component is audience insights. We can learn more about how the audience is responding to a post with certain interest tags. So again, this is called audience optimization, and supposedly specifying an audience will make it more likely that those folks will actually see your post. In other words, it's supposed to improve your organic reach for that audience. I am skeptical. Facebook is not one to go giving away organic reach, so I'm not sure how firm a promise that is. So that is the quick and dirty intro to audience optimization. I personally have not played around with it, so I can't tell you anything from personal experience, but what I will do, Social Media Explorer actually published a very good post that gives you a lot more detail, and I will include the link in the blog post for this episode if you want to learn more. Or you can just go to Social Media Explorer and type in Facebook Audience Optimization and get the scoop from them. Okay, more news, this time from LinkedIn. LinkedIn is actually getting into the education business. So their leadership want to make LinkedIn a site where we not only go to network, but also to learn what we need to learn to advance our careers. And this comes from a recent article in Forbes where they spoke with their with LinkedIn's, it was a member of LinkedIn's leadership, cannot remember the gentleman's name. But they talked about how last year LinkedIn actually purchased lynda.com for a record $1.5 billion. Now, if you remember, lynda.com, that's lynda.com, is the premier site for online learning, and LinkedIn bought them outright. So it looks like that is going to be the next phase of LinkedIn. And I'm going to share a quote from the article here. Quote, LinkedIn wants to become a tool that predicts what promotions or jobs users will want next, and to automatically suggest Lynda courses to help workers get there, unquote. Now, if you think about it, this makes perfect sense, right? Because our LinkedIn profiles that's where we make record of our skills, our education, our experience, and LinkedIn can use that data to intelligently predict where you might be wanting to go in your career and what you would need to learn to get there. So, I can foresee, if you have a lot of marketing on your resume, LinkedIn might say, maybe your next goal is director of marketing. So let's recommend some courses to get you there, maybe managing marketing teams or something like that. Just a hypothetical example here. So it's an interesting move for LinkedIn, but I think it makes very, very good sense. Anyway, those educational features will be rolling out in 2016, so keep an eye out for those. Okay, our content hit of the week is a post called Why You Won't Recognize SEO in 5 Years. This was written by Megan Keeney Anderson over on the HubSpot blog. And yes, I can hear the sound of foreheads being smacked as I read that title because, man, just when we thought we had SEO figured out, it's changing all over again. The other thing you're hearing is a pug snoring in my lap, so I apologize for a little background noise. Anyway, in this post on HubSpot, Megan goes through 3 emerging search patterns that are really changing the way changing the face of SEO as we know it. For example, voice-activated search. That is changing the way those searches are being structured. And so from our standpoint as content marketers, yes, we need to continue producing quality content. That's going to be the key element in our search engine, our search mojo, if you will. But we also need to know about what's going on with SEO because we need to know the different ways people are getting to that content and make adjustments accordingly. And Megan in this post does a great job laying that out for us. So I will provide the link in the blog post for this episode. Again, it's called Why You Won't Recognize SEO in 5 Years by Megan Keeney Anderson over on the HubSpot blog. That's it for this week's newsfeed. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, Why Your Team Needs a Quality Czar. If you've been listening to this podcast through the month of January, as well as keeping up with the blog and the weekly video tips, you will notice that our theme has been quality. And there's a reason for that. In 2016, the content world has changed. And what was a few years ago kind of a comfortably placed exchange of ideas has now become about as genteel as Houston freeways at rush hour, okay? In the content world, we are seeing exabytes of content being created and published on a daily basis. Now, if you're keeping score, an exabyte is 1 quintillion bytes or 1 billion gigabytes. Translation, there's a whole lot of content being created and shared every day. And I would bet that about 99% of that content is total crap, which if not 99%, pretty darn close. There's a lot of garbage out there, folks. And that's actually good news for those of us who are not producing crap, who are putting thought and good insights into our content, because that's going to be our key differentiator as this content universe becomes more and more crowded and more noisy. So when your audience knows that they can rely on you for quality content, they will keep coming back. And the example I use from my own experience is ProBlogger. Darren Rouse and his team do a fantastic job at creating great, insightful content that you don't find everywhere else. So whenever they come up in my Twitter feed, in my Facebook feed, I always stop and look and see what they're talking about. And I will at least read the title and get a gist of what the content is about, because I know they produce quality. And that's exactly where we want to be with our target audiences. So we've been talking quite a lot about what quality content entails and how we can raise that quality bar for our own content in 2016. And now I want to address the question of how to keep it going, how to keep that commitment alive. It's all well and good at the beginning. Everybody's on board. Everybody is buying into a higher quality standard. Everybody knows what the standards are. But how do you keep that commitment going? How do you ensure that the content you produce in December 2016 is going to be as strong as the content you produced in January 2016? Well, the simple answer is you need a quality czar. Now, when I first put this podcast content together, I called it a quality Nazi. And then as I went along, it just seemed in bad taste. So we'll call this person a quality czar. Not that the czars were particularly kind, but I digress. A quality czar is a term that I made up. And no, it would not be an official job title. But my point is, you need one person on your team who, A, knows your quality standards backwards and forwards, and number two, has the authority and the ability and the willingness to enforce those standards. Now, again, unless you're cranking out copious amounts of content every day, this would not be a person's full-time job. It wouldn't be like an editor at a magazine or a newspaper whose full-time job is to review and ensure that the content meets quality standards. So your quality czar could be your lead copywriter, it could be a content marketing manager, it could be a strategist, depending on how your team is structured. But again, this is going to be the equivalent of a managing editor in the news media world. So what do you look for in a quality czar? There are certain characteristics that you want to look for. Number one, this person needs to be a good writer or has to be very familiar with the standards of good writing. And no, I'm not just talking about grammar and punctuation. I am talking about good writing, good quality writing. This has to be a person who could probably get an editing job at a magazine because they are so they're so what is the word I'm looking for? Immersed in good writing. The second quality that you want to look for is this person has to be a stickler for detail. Yes, a little bit on the OCD side, if I may go there. Person who has a real eye for detail and can, if someone sends them a story or a post for a review, they're not just going to gloss over and say, yeah, that looks good. They're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And they have to be comfortable with that kind of activity. And the third characteristic is you need someone who doesn't mind being unpopular. And I say that because this is the person who's going to have to push back on the content creators on your team and say, hey, this post or this video is not up to our standards. Here's what you need to do. And someone who can address that task, not only not mind being quote unquote the bad guy and pushing back, but also to do so in a helpful way. Not just to say, okay, I don't like this or this doesn't meet our standards, but actually help the content creator make those adjustments. And when I wrote this characteristic, someone who doesn't mind being unpopular, it took me back to the days when I worked at Prudential. I was working at one of the field offices, and I was the compliance Nazi. Okay, I was the one who made sure that the paperwork in triplicate was filed appropriately, and that we made sure they documented that this product was right for this person, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes it kind of sucked. I would get to know these agents and I was rooting for them and I wanted them to do well, but I was the person who had to go back and say, hey, that $1 million policy you wrote yesterday, we didn't get the we didn't get the suitability information that we needed, so we need you to go back and do that. Not fun, not a fun job, and that's the kind of conversations that your quality czar is going to have with your content creators. Again, they need to do it in a constructive way, in a helpful way, but they need to be a stickler and say, okay, this is not acceptable as it is. Let me help you get it up to code. So once you find the right person for that task and they are willing to not be so popular every single day, there are certain things that you need to do. Number one, you need to give him or her authority. You need to back this person 100%. You need to gather your team and say, okay, John is going to be our content czar or our content Nazi or whatever you want to call him. All your stuff is going to be submitted to him. He says what goes, and if he says that something needs to be changed, we're behind him all the way. So, no trying to go over his head and get exceptions. Make sure that that your entire team knows that you are 100% behind this person, and that he or she has the authority to say what goes and what doesn't go. The second thing you need to do is establish a workflow process. So nothing can get published without this person's approval, and there needs to be a workflow in place. How are you going to how is work going to be submitted to this person for his or her approval? What is the ideal turnaround time for getting pieces approved and published? You really need to get very detailed on how that workflow process is going to work, because if you don't have a process in place, if it's just kind of loosey-goosey and everybody's saying, oh, yeah, John has veto authority, what does that mean? You need to get that workflow in place, get your entire team on board with it so that they know exactly how things are going to go. You also need to give your Quality Czar access to your analytics, because he or she needs to see what kind of results you're getting, and to, if you want to do some A/B testing to see what works and what doesn't, because he or she is going to be the keeper of your standards, and you need to be open to the evolution of those standards. And if you have an approach that is just not working, then you need to be aware of that, and your Quality Czar is going to be the person to note that discrepancy in your analytics and to revise your standards as appropriate. And then finally, you need to give this person your ongoing support. Again, if a dispute arises, even if someone from the C-suite, even if the CEO is writing a post for your blog, you need to stand behind this person. And it's tough to go to someone in the C-suite and say, okay, that guest post, yes, love what you did. Here's what we need to adjust. And you need to make sure that your Quality Czar has your ongoing support for all those difficult conversations. So that is my take on why your team needs a Quality Czar if you're going to up your game in 2016. If you have any questions or would like to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And the best way to reach me is through the website resonancecontent.com. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. Of course, we've been talking a lot about quality this month. In fact, you're probably happy to see the month ending so that I can shut up about quality and move on to something else. But for today's tip, I want to talk about quantity, or more accurately, frequency. I got a call last week from a company. This was a real estate company based here in Houston, and they said, we really want to hit social media hard in 2016. We want to have a strong presence. We want to get a lot of followers. We want to invest in it as a key driver of leads and of traffic to our website. They were really, really gung-ho. So I said, great, my kind of people. So I put together an estimate and I sent that over to them. And the next day they said, yeah, so how much would it cost for you to post for us once a week? The short answer to that question is it would cost you nothing, because we wouldn't. That's not something we would do. And here's my point. In today's content universe, posting once a week on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn is just not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. It's like driving a moped onto the Autobahn, okay? Not only are you not going to get where you want to go, but you'll probably get run over in the process. And sadly, I talk to prospective clients like this all the time. They're looking to save a buck here and there, and they don't want to make the investment. They're trying to go on the cheap. And then there are those who say, well, we just want to post once a week for now, and we're going to ramp up as we go along. Well, the problem with that is they start posting once a week, they lope along, they don't get results, and then they throw up their hands and say, this doesn't work, we're going to go back to our banner ads and our cold calling. So, as you focus on quality this year, make sure the quantity, make sure the frequency is there as well. Make sure you are getting in front of your target audience often enough for your content to make a difference. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. Also, if you want to learn more about content marketing, I invite you to download our free resource, 5 Things You Must Know About Content Marketing. And you can get your very own copy at contentmarketingaudio.com. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from the late, great Steve Jobs. He once said, quote, "Be a yardstick of quality. Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.